You have nothing to fear but fear himself. Here's your look at new McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Infinite Frontier Scarecrow. As a young child, Jonathan Crane was subjected to sick and twisted experiments on fear subjected by his own father. Emotionally scarred and mentally unstable from the ordeal, Crane spent his childhood living in fear until he made the important realization: if he could control fear, it would never again control him. Over time, this interest in fear became an obsession. Graduating from college with a doctorate in psychology and specialty in phobias, Jonathan began experimenting on others, subjecting them to a hallucinogenic fear toxin he developed that brought out their worst nightmares. Before we stare at He Who Scares, I'd like to first thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys, who did provide the sample of the DC Infinite Frontier Scarecrow that we could have a look at in this video. Grabbing now the tape measure just to see how tall the figure stands. First, we'll do this in inches. I'm taking it right to the very top of his straw hat. The Scarecrow stands 7 inches in height, or he's going to be 18 centimeters tall. Accessories come a tad light on the figure, as Scarecrow only comes included with a trading card and display stand. First, for the trading card, well, a nice departure here. First of all, it's art. It's not figure photography. Second of all, it's all done here in black and white instead of bringing in some color. It's a different change of pace, but I gotta say, I do like the look of this card quite a lot. I don't know if this is actually Jorge Jimenez. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I don't know if this is actually his artwork, but certainly the design of Scarecrow is based on his. And then, of course, flip this around to the back. Tells you that his real name is Jonathan Crane with a quite substantial paragraph read-up. If you'd like to read this for yourself, it happens to also be the same thing I read at the beginning of this review. Going to put that to the side. Figure also comes included with a display stand. Nothing new, nothing different in this case. Psst. The DC logo is down below, printed, and of course you got one singular peg that's going to attach to the underside of either one of Scarecrow's feet. See? Go ahead and put that stand to the side. One thing I will say, though, about the display stand is this may be a case where you really will want to use the display stand, as Scarecrow is quite top-heavy, as we'll look at now in a second. Picking the figure up. I said now in a second, literally just picking the figure up. Getting a closer look at Scarecrow. It's definitely a departure than what we're used to seeing with Jonathan Crane. In this case, we're actually getting something very unique, very different, and kind of admittingly really cool. It has sort of a tiki vibe to it. The design of the character actually looks like something I would expect to see maybe from like Scooby-Doo, for example. Sort of got like a gas mask here on the front for his mask. And of course, he's got now this straw hat that's on top of his head. Neither of which, though, are removable. In fact, if you were to remove or try to remove both, you'd ultimately just be popping the head off the ball joint, as you can see right here. Doing this, by the way, I will say be very, very careful. Not that you would ever find the reason to want to take off the head, for example, for Scarecrow. But if you did, you'll notice that connecting the top of his hat to the side of his arm are 2 tubes. And you really would not want to break these. I only just popped this off to show you that there's nothing swappable at all on this. The mask and hat are fully intact and you can't remove them. Again, the design is based on Jorge Jimenez's design of Scarecrow, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. Definitely a very different take for what we get for this, not the Clown Prince of Crime, but the Master of Fear. Sort of has all these kind of rags that he has. It sort of almost looks like he's got a poncho that he wears, and it's made of 2 different colors. It's got more of a green. As you can see, like, even has this interesting stitch work to it. Most of the images that I did see of Jorge's Scarecrow online actually did seem to have Scarecrow more in a kind of brownish color. I'm not sure why specifically they went the route of the green, but both like the hat as well as kind of this shawl, this series of rags that he wears on the front of his torso, I think is actually more closer to brown. The green does work well, but I don't think it's as close of a color as what is in the comics. Underneath actually all this, I was surprised to find, first of all, that it's layers. Now, these are 2 attached. I mean, you're not going to be able to separate those at all, but this is actually something that you can lift up, and you notice the rest of his costuming underneath. And there's like a lot of layers going on here. So you can like lift this up, for example, and you notice he also has a different texture of material, a different texture of plastic. And as you can see, you can lift that up, and then that's his real body then underneath. What's rather clever, though, is the fact that McFarlane Toys would have gone the mile of actually sculpting everything that you wouldn't normally see. Like, for example, if I was to lift this up and then lift this up, even just to see, like, he's got a little knot there on the top of his tied belt. Now, granted, though, the string isn't tied or painted in, I should say. But the fact that they actually did go the mile of actually sculpting that over top, even for something you would never even really see, is really good on their part. Admittingly, though, there doesn't seem to be a lot of really paint happening here at all on the figure. I think in most of the cases that they've actually just relied on the actual molding of the plastic itself. Sort of, again, you've got this kind of grass skirting, again, like kind of poncho or sort of like a rag cloak that he's wearing over top of his body. Like, this kind of looks interesting, like the way they've done all this. It's all made of using a softer plastic. But again, I kind of wish that there was a little bit more color happening here. If you really see like the artwork of Scarecrow, or even had picked up Infinite Frontier, we saw him actually in the pages, he actually has a lot more color than what we're actually getting here for the figure itself. I mean, even like his legs, for example, if I was to lift this up, for example, like the sculpting is really good. I just kind of wish there was a little bit of paint happening here, because there's, again, a lot of really just the coloring of the plastic happening. What there is, at least in coloring, is where they've actually gone and painted the additional grass of his hat here. I don't know if it's actually made of grass or it's actually made of twigs, but as you can see, they've actually got like a little kind of an off yellow color that they've striped in there as well. It does a nice enough job of breaking that up. And again, like, to its credit, he does have some decent paint on there on the front of his eyes there as well, and have been nicely outlined in black. He's got long hair, which is really something I'm not used to seeing when it comes to Scarecrow. For me, all the intents and purposes of thinking of Scarecrow, I usually go the route of classic Scarecrow. But I gotta say, like, the new design works quite well for this character. He has these sort of syringe needles that are on the ends of his fingers. You can see the way they connect actually onto his forearms. This one only actually goes to his mid-forearm, while this one right here only goes to about here, but then he's got these additional hoses that connect to the inside of his hat. It's a really cool looking design. Although I have to admit, though, when it comes to this figure that I have, at least, one of my shoulders, not my shoulder, the shoulder of Scarecrow, is a tad on more on the loose side. This arm isn't actually so bad, but because actually the way they've sculpted this off to the side, this does get in a bit of a way when it actually comes to the articulation of the figure. Speaking of the articulation of the figure, let's have a look at that right now. Despite for the fact he does actually have these hoses on the underside of his hat, he actually does rotate his head pretty decently. All things considered, really, because of the straggly hair that he has, you would almost think that, well, it would limit a little bit of the articulation, and you would really be right. I mean, like, you can move the head down, but of course the gas mask that he wears is going to kind of get in the way of things. You can move it up, but you can only move it up by so far. You can also hinge it back and forth also as well. And I wouldn't really recommend rotating the head all the way around, because you're going to start pulling against this. Although they really did a lot for an extra length to it. So if you really did want to, and you did want to rotate it all the way around, you have a little bit of extra mileage to work with. As I've already mentioned, though, the arm on this side, at least, is a little more on the looser side. But you can still rotate the arm all the way around. Just be careful of those hoses. You can get, in this case, about 90 degrees. You'll notice also as well, something I didn't even mention, is the one side he actually has more of a fitted sleeve to his arm, whereas this side he actually has more of a baggier sleeve. It's not symmetrical, but it actually does work quite well for the character. Kind of just looks like he's made of rags and carpets and all the things he would have found just to kind of do a makeshift costuming. He does have a double hinge here on this side of his elbow. He does also have a double hinge on this side, although again, like, the arms are going to be a little bit different in size. And then, of course, when it comes to his hands, you can rotate them also back and forth, and he has a hinge up and down. The thing about this hand, unfortunately, as you probably have already seen, it does come loose, for me at least, way too often. I've popped it off now a couple of times already, and I always have to find my way popping it back into place. Maybe I'll just leave and I'll fix it before we get to final looks. But yeah, these peg joints seem like they're a little on the more, I don't want to say like fragile side, but I did notice when I'm moving the hands back and forth. And this hand isn't so bad, but this hand right here, this pops off. It's happened at least for me about 6 times now. And I always end up having to kind of pop it back into place. We'll get back to that more in a second. Upper torso is on a ball joint. Again, this is all softer plastic, so it helps a little bit to get that top of his torso to actually move. And then if you actually move this out of the way, he actually does have a secondary ball joint at the base of his body, so you can actually rock it back and forth that way as well. Legs split out, and at least because they have the splits on either side of these rags, you can actually split the legs pretty decently. You can bring the legs forward and back, and then if we just to lift this up for a little bit, he does have just a little bit of a swivel at the top where that's attached by the ball joint. He does have a double hinge on the knee, and then he does have the standard articulation in the feet, so you can move them back and forth this way and also ankle rock them too. This honestly was a design I don't think I was really going to like. I mean, when I saw the first images of this figure, I thought to myself, I don't know. This is not really a Scarecrow I really can consider to be like a good updated design. Although, to go back and look at the artwork that it's based from, see the artwork that Jorge actually designed Scarecrow to look like, he kind of has a real more haunting look to him than what traditionally Scarecrow would look like. Scarecrow's had one of those characters that has had a lot of designs over the years, through various different comic pages, through, of course, being interpreted into animated series as well. Scarecrow's had a lot of looks for him. While this is certainly more of a deviation away from what Scarecrow's traditionally used to look like, I actually kind of like the design of him quite a lot. I wish he did have a little bit more color, though, because of so much cool sculpting that they put to the green, they put to like that burgundy red underneath. I think by just enhancing that just a little bit, by adding some additional color, could even lend better to the idea that he kind of is made of rags in this case. And again, I think in the comics, Scarecrow bears more closer of a resemblance to have a lot of browns, a lot more of rusted reds. In this case, they've actually gone the approach of more of a lighter green, and that reddish color it still works well, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more browns brought to the table when it comes to this new release of Scarecrow. Overall, though, a great looking figure. When the time comes for me to display the Infinite Frontier Scarecrow on my shelf, I'm going to go the route of displaying him with his display stand. I would probably recommend the same for you if you're looking to pick up the figure for yourself. Because he has so much plastic on that poncho that he wears, and of course the grass hat, that's going to add a whole lot extra weight. And he's actually quite top heavy, resulting in the figure being a lot more unstable when you're just trying to have him standing on his own. That I would certainly recommend, again, using the display stand. It's there after all. I mean, if a company's going to include a display stand, why not make use of it? Scarecrow has some really interesting aspects to him. I would not want to be the person that's always so stuck in the past and say, well, that's not the Scarecrow I'm used to seeing. I always want Scarecrow to look like, well, a field Scarecrow. But this Scarecrow is an interesting design, and I kind of really like it. The more I look at this, and the more I'm looking at the pages I've seen Scarecrow appearing in online, because I haven't yet picked up any of those issues yet, not only am I more interested to go and run out to my local comic book store, pick up the issues that have Scarecrow featured inside of it, but I'm also even more interested in this design of Scarecrow as a figure. Yes, it doesn't have maybe as much the pain as maybe what he's portrayed in the comics as having, but he really has some really interesting elements to him. He's not a classic Scarecrow, but he's a pretty cool example of how you can update a character, go a very different direction with the way that you design a character, and still sort of still occupy the same type of vibe that original character design would have had. Scarecrow in this case looks very, very much different than that classic looking Scarecrow. And I gotta say, the design works rather nicely here. Big thank you though to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide the sample of the Infinite Frontier Scarecrow that we could have a look at in this review. What do you guys think of the figure? Whether you've picked it up for yourself or just based on this review. Is this also a figure that you would pick up and add to your collection? Let me know down below in the comment section. And if you also like this video, hit it with a like. If you're enjoying the content and certainly want to stick around for more, then make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the bell notification. While for right now, we've wrapped up the review for the Infinite Frontier Scarecrow, definitely going to be a lot more DC Multiverse reviews coming your way. And as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.